welcome back. This is the usual stream for writing a programming language in Rust. And today, as with the last stream, is intended to be the final day that I'll be working on the implementation of the Seed language. Seed is intended to be a test bed language for playing around with different programming language ideas and is intended to be the basis of other more novel programming languages such as Ash, which I'm intending to implement hopefully in the next stream, but basically after the current language. And yeah, Happy New Year everyone. It's good to be streaming again this year. And yeah, just a quick recap of the project. Like I said, this is the Seed programming language. It'll be used as a basis for Ash, which will be intended to be an alternative to Bash scripting. And the environment that I'm doing all of this on is a remote session that I use Mosh to create a stable connection for. I use Tmux to split the session into different parts and different panes. I use fairly vanilla Vim with NerdTree on the left here. That's basically the only plugin I have at the moment. On the right I use an ENTR script to rerun tests and recompile the project whenever a file changes. And then down here on the bottom left I have the bash shell that I use mostly for interfacing with Git, but I will run different commands as needed there as well. And so yeah, that's about where we are. Like I said, this is intended or will potentially be the last stream for this language, and so we could consider it 99.789% done. And where we are is we had gotten most of the way through upgrading Rust in this project. So it had been on version I think 1.60. I've bumped that to I believe 1.83 or so. So there were a couple of changes, a lot of formatting updates to be made, but we're nearing the completion of this. And so what I'm going, and I was just doing a little bit of cleanup just to, I guess, remove some of the repetitive work from today's stream. So hopefully there shouldn't be a huge amount left to do when, I guess, fixing up the last bits of this. So let's take a look at some of these. So we have source Lexer mod has some commented out code, and I use a comment checker that I wrote in Python before, and it can be useful just by enforcing some fairly basic restrictions on comments, such as they have to be correct, unless they're code comments, they have to be correctly formatted English statements and have to have specific amounts of indentation and things like that, and starting with capital letters and things like that as well. And those can help us catch commented out code, which is different to code comments. So code comments can actually be explanations, they can be examples, but then I don't want to allow commented out code. I tried to follow one of those pieces of advice from Clean Code that I have thought is a good practice over the years, which is when you do have code in your code base that isn't needed anymore, actually delete it rather than just commenting it out, just because in general those kind of pieces of code will be, well, first of all, it's clutter if you leave it around, but also in general it will be captured by the source control system that you're using anyway. So it's not like it's gone forever in a way of thinking, at least. So we can, that might need to be uncommented actually, but we'll stick to these bits first. So we have eval mod, and I was able to replace another instance of this issue, and I believe the fix that I was looking at was being explicit about the conversion using into, maybe try into, and I created a new error variant and actually renamed another one to make it more generic, and we turn it into just this cast failed error. So we explicitly try to do the conversion instead of using the somewhat more implicit as operator. And so this function should return result or option, can't use question mark operator in a closure like that. Interesting. Well, first of all, that should also be I64. Actually, that won't need to be, well, it doesn't really need the type annotation because I believe new int, the fact that that takes an I64 will mean that we can omit this type, but in this case I think it's kind of useful to make it explicit. Potentially we'll see what the linter says later, but this is a more pressing issue, the fact that we need a result in this area. So let's take a look at Rust iterator. So that can return an option. So just thinking, are there any other ways I can work around this? I mean, I've got the same issue down here as well. So some workarounds are to maybe just do a panic. I mean, that's basically what it was doing before, except the linter was complaining about that. Another thing we could do is extract that logic into its own function, maybe turn it into a for loop. So let's try this. And that might be all we need to do there. Oops, I deleted too much. How about that? Oh, I don't need the OK there. And I think I was just leaving out the OK in those spots just because list and string. Or a little, I guess I didn't want to wrap them in an OK, but I think I can update these. Because I basically didn't want to do that. I don't think that looks nice. But since I'll be replacing that in a second, I think it should be alright. And I need to do the same down here. Oh, I guess I can do it like that. That's slightly better, I think. Oh, interesting. So where is that coming from? Oh, because I've got with capacity, but I'm accessing that index. Like that's different to creating it with elements at each of those places. So that should really be push. Yeah, and we're good in that scenario. So now we can do the same with items. So let's try that. That's interesting. So the current version of Lallerpop that I'm using will be problematic in future. Now, I did try upgrading Lallerpop. Oh, have I no more? It's not complaining anymore. Oh, but is that because of stuff I've enabled in the just file? Yeah, so I'm allowing those. So if I disable that again, well, first of all, I will, I think, rename deref to lock, which is potentially a more accurate name because we're locking and dereferencing. So at the moment we have it called deref2. I wonder if I called it deref lock, would it, or lock deref, would I get any lines that are too long? Let's see. Yeah, so we don't have issues with line lengths in that file. Let's try this. Yeah, all the line lengths seem to be fine, so we'll call it lock deref. Now we'll see, do we have to, like, will we be able to export it in some places? So I was able to see that it doesn't need to be imported explicitly. Well, we've got macro use from value, so maybe that will make it work for us. Maybe if I just remove that. Okay. Well, it didn't work as expected, but at least because the, I guess, name is quite unique at this point, it's very clear on what I have to do. Where was the other file? It was in functions and it was in bind. I guess I can remove that as well. And that probably doesn't need another import. Okay, no, it does. Again, I still don't understand the import situation. So that should be all good to go. And then, yeah, what I'll do, so I've already gone ahead and created a dedicated branch for these changes. So what I'm going to do is split each of the changes up into their own, I guess, just separate commit. So we'll start off with the formatting directives. And there are a lot of these. And that's kind of one of the reasons why it can be useful to separate them out. Because some of the other changes might be more functional. And so if I was wanting to track down errors, it can be useful when I am separating them into separate comments. So this is being very pedantic, but I want to only include the copyright bumps on the files that I've actually changed. So I'm actually going to go back and specifically add copyright notices for the files that change the formatting, or basically only bump the versions of the files that change in that commit. As is often the case, very little reason to actually do it this way, but you know, this is for fun. This is a hobby, so might as well do it the way that suits. Cool, so now we'll go back over those files specifically and add the header bumps. Now I should do those individually. Cool. And what message will I give these? Inline format arguments. Cool, so that's that done, and then the next big bulk of changes is to do with, what was it, lock deref. So that does involve lock deref, but it also has unrelated changes. It's gonna make this pair of commits dependent on each other. They won't be able to be compiled independently, but you know, that's fine. In the past, I actually would have taken extra efforts to separate the commits so that they could be compiled independently. to know that I've become at least a little bit more flexible. Cool. Oh, I did that again. No, no need. I think all of these got updated in the last as well. Okay, that one didn't. Then we have mod. And finally we have value. Yeah, I suppose there's a bunch of these where I will just say, resolved clipping or resolve linter issues. And yeah, a lot of files to get touched by this change, but at the same time, most of the changes are fairly simple in nature, so I'm not too bothered about them. So let's get down to the last number of linting issues, and most of the problems here will really just be trying to configure the linter properly. So let's try this one. So first of all, I'm just going to try putting it there, which I think I tried before and failed with. So I'll just try and recompile it again just in case. But so we have it at the crate level, at the module level, at the function level, which I think I'm doing here. Oh, and I also need to do it at the module level, I guess. Now that should be, so that's being applied to that module that's getting generated. this first. So let's try applying that. Yeah, we have at the item level on a specific statement. Hi C Films, welcome to the channel. I'm doing well, I hope you're doing well too. Yeah, so it's mostly, I guess it's inspired by a number of things. Probably JavaScript has had one of the biggest influences, despite JavaScript not really being my favorite language, but you know, there are a lot of nice things about JavaScript, like the prototype structure and things like that, and even just the very small number of core primitive types I think is quite nice in JavaScript. So it did have a big influence on it, but it borrows a lot of features from a lot of, I would say, mainstream C style programming languages in general, and even the syntax kind of borrows from some of the developments in that space, say by the likes of Go and Rust, for example, even with regards to how blocks and conditionals are defined and things like that. But for the most part, this language is intended to be a fairly generic core, which is going to, so there aren't really many novel aspects to this language. Why did that happen now when I changed it from having the specific change or having the specific allow to allow all? Yeah, so in terms of imperative, object-oriented, functional, or logical, it's, I would say, closest to object-orientated. There, you know, you can write it in a functional style, as with a lot of imperative languages. It wouldn't be logical. It would be closest to object-oriented, but it doesn't have, it's, I guess, fairly typical based on recent development or recent languages in the space of systems languages, I guess, where it's object oriented but without inheritance. So it uses not really the prototype structure from JavaScript, but almost the prototype idea, where the intention is that if you want to create a second instance of a class, you really just kind of clone the original for the most part, or you define the structure and you define your constructors quite manually. And also, if you want to share functionality, then you'll probably do that using some combination of composition and delegation rather than inheritance. Let me see. I suppose I don't need allow clippy all because it's really just this one error or this one warning that we've been getting. But yeah, I would say imperative primarily with a bit of object-oriented, I guess, ideas involved as well. So that seems to have sorted that. And yeah, the project is more or less, I would say, yeah, today is intended to be the final day that I'll be working on this specific language. And then the next day that I'll be streaming, I'm intending to work on, I guess it's not necessarily successor, but the next stage of this language, which won't be this language any longer. So at the moment I'm working on Seed, and then the next day I'm streaming, I intend to be working on Ash, which is intended to be more or less take the same syntax, take the same core and semantics, but make it more domain specific. The follow-on Ash is intended to be an alternative to Bash programming that keeps the ergonomics of Bash but gives it hopefully friendlier syntax and semantics. So we have source lexer mod, so I think I can remove oh no, it's fine there where it is. So that's those changes, so let's try committing those. Oh, very cool. What's the goal of the language you're writing? So we've that, and let's take a look at the remaining change. So we've manual string new. I wonder if that's still showing up. Yeah, so that's also coming from the same place more or less. So I think it's coming from build RS. Yeah. So let's see, has there been development here? So this limiting rule is still Clippy. So if I do allow all, yeah, so those warnings aren't coming from Clippy, which makes sense, but the ones I'm seeing are. Well, that's very interesting. Simplifying statistics. I think it is good to focus on specific domains like that when developing a new language, because I see a lot of people solving problems or aiming to do languages that solve problems that are more or less already solved, or it's kind of like, oh, I want to make a new general purpose language that has, just like solves little problems in languages that they're using, but which aren't, I guess, big picture problems. Whereas if you have a specific use case in mind, I think that's a great place to start. I know there are a lot of array programming languages, like, well, I was going to say APL. I mean, I wouldn't really kind of consider that a mainstream language or a modern approach for statistics, for example. But I believe R and maybe Wolfram Alpha, to a certain extent, sound like they tackle that domain as well. But even just having a niche to focus on is great for approaching languages, just because it's great to work on general purpose ones as a learning tool. But if you actually have an idea for a language that you want people to use, I think focusing on a domain is a great place to start. Yeah, I mean, that sounds perfect. I think in general, focusing on specific domains and specific sets of problems can be useful because I guess we have lots of general purpose programming languages at this point, and even those have gotten more domain specific over the years as well. So figuring out your niche is very important these days. Arguably more important than ever if you do actually want your language to be used and to stand out. So yeah, Clippy all just does not seem to do what I want it to do. So let's try that instead. And let's just ask ChatGPT just in case. Yeah, we can allow multiple warnings on one line, but I prefer to split them up. So let's see. The new language is being developed with Python. Interesting. I haven't heard a lot of people being inspired by PHP for syntax, and in fact, I think PHP and Bash have a lot in common in terms of I'm sure one was probably inspired by the other in a number of ways when it was getting developed. It's like there are, and of course PHP has changed a lot over the years, and I haven't really been keeping up with developments either. I mean, there are a number of aspects to it that did really make things a lot easier and make, say, prototyping of websites a lot faster as well. And so there, there's a lot to be learned from it in that regard. But yeah, and that also makes sense. I guess those are all dynamically typed languages as well, which also makes sense for a math and statistics language, because at your core, in general, you're probably going to be mostly dealing with numbers, with integers and real value and real numbers. So I guess there isn't, when you're programming in the large in particular, it can be very useful to have more statically typed languages. Now, I happen to be working on a scripting language, so that also doesn't apply to me as much. But I think people have started tending more towards typed languages in general because of those issues that happen when you start working on big projects without types. But when you are only going to be using a subset of types, it'll be gradually typed. Yeah, that sounds cool too. I haven't done a lot of gradual typing. I mean, I've used TypeScript, and funnily enough, I've missed having types in JavaScript for the longest time, and I thought TypeScript would be the answer for that, but I did actually find that as I was, gradually adding types to my projects, it wasn't actually giving me the benefits of types that I'm used to when I'm using, say, the likes of Go or Rust. So it's an interesting concept. I possibly have to use it more, but it's not something I've personally found a lot of value with so far. But again, I also don't have a huge amount of experience with it either. It seems like a very interesting idea, and it seems like the perfect halfway house between, okay, you're prototyping your program, you don't really want to think about types too much, or at the very least you don't want to, just enforce your ideas of the types too early on because you want flexibility to change it later, versus, when you have kind of scoped out your program, you're fairly certain about the types and you want to then enforce them. And it seems like gradual typing is the perfect halfway house and solution to that. Like I say, my mileage has varied, but it is still a very interesting idea to me. String variable names will start with $, all number variable names will start with a hash, and all arrays variable names will start with an @ So the types of values are somewhat implied by the names of the variables. That's interesting. I haven't come across that before in general. I think I've encountered some languages that do that. I know that Bash has a similar setup with the @ symbol in particular for arrays, I think. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense in terms of being very clear about what types variables are and helping with the gradual typing. So Clippy all can be applied to the modular crate. Or can I? Not really sure why it's using the bang there. Is that because it's being applied to the crate? Seems to be. But regardless, just listing the Clippy rules individually seems to do what I want. So I'm actually just going to leave that as is. And I'm actually just going to kind of merge this with the previous commit as well to just allow certain linting rules. Well, that doesn't really describe what I'm looking for. So it'd nearly be ignore certain linting rules. Perl, that is, a language I haven't come across in a very long time. I think I've only written maybe 1 or 2 projects in Perl. It is a very interesting language. There were a lot of rules, I remember, when I was learning it first, in terms of just trying to keep track of what all the different operators in Perls do, what all the different bits of syntax do. I mean, it was at a time as well where I had a lot of interest in learning lots of different programming languages. I don't think I would necessarily revisit Perl right now, but it had some cool ideas. I remember, like, processing a file, for example, was quite a complicated affair for me at the time, trying to figure that one out. But it was also interesting too. Oh yeah, I remember hash variables as well, with the percent symbol. And yeah, I remember even just being confused by the fact that I guess I was learning a couple of languages at the time as well, and getting very confused with the fact that all of them had different names for similar things, such as the fact that yeah, Perl called them, I guess, hashes or hash tables or what have you, and then Java would be calling them maps and all the rest of it. But yeah, I'd forgotten that it had that you actually had to specify the type with those symbols as well. I remember variables had to be prefixed with dollar symbols, but I hadn't realized that only certain types of variables would take a dollar symbol. That's interesting. So that's that done. So what I'll do is I'll check out main and I'll do my usual merge. So that was refactor, upgrade, Rust. And I'll do the usual version bump as well. So this will be a patch level change because it's just doing a refactor. It's not actually changing any functionality. Cool. Now I might need to address that ladder pop issue, but what I might do first is, well, first I want to push that to GitHub, and then I will delete the upgrade branch. But then I also want to check out, which one was it? Refactor do args error, even though that should really be I guess it's a refactor. I mean, it's a yeah, it's a tentative, I guess, relationship with the idea of a refactor. I would nearly say it would be closer to a feature. What do I think of your variable types compared to Perl? I guess it's, well, to be honest, I don't really have a strong opinion either way, just because it's been so long since I've worked with a system like that, that, you know, I'm not sure how it would actually affect my writing of a program if I were to use an approach like that. I mean, like a lot of things, it seems like it would have a lot of pros and cons. I am used to not having that, I would say, type information in the variable names. But what I would say, actually, now that I think of it, so I mentioned APL earlier. I mean, it wouldn't be a mainstream language, but it is an array language that I have used in the past. And I do remember, because it was dynamic and because values could be scalars or arrays, I do remember it being, or at least I found it difficult to reason about my programs and to keep track of almost the shape of the arrays and data in general without, I would say, without the use of types. So because I didn't have types either on my functions or on my variables, I did find it in those scenarios, because you're working with big, I guess, sets of data and manipulating the shape, I did find it tricky to keep track of those things. And I was thinking it would be nice, like that was a scenario where I was thinking I would like types to be able, because sometimes you want types to enforce your constraints, and that's very useful as well, but sometimes it is useful for readability of code, so that at different milestones you can, mentally verify that your understanding of, because you're looking at static code, that's what code is in general. It's a program at rest, and so we have to manually interpret what is this going to look like when it's actually in execution. And at that time, I would say being able to have some kind of visual cue to remind myself what the data should look like at that point in time, I think that would be useful in that kind of scenario. And so I would imagine that those kind of visual cues on variables would be useful, but I also haven't used a system like that in a while. So similar to gradual typing, it's a one that could make sense in theory, but then it's kind of, again, your mileage may vary. So it's a one, like, that's why I like working on languages, and especially is one of the reasons I wanted to have this language where I could play around with language ideas, because it's one thing to have an idea that you think could improve your experience with writing a program, but it's only once you actually use that for a while that you actually see the pros and cons of it. And in fact, the first iteration of this language, there were a bunch of things that I was doing that I thought would be fine, or would be decisions that I could take in the short term and then fix later. But then when I was actually using the language to write some example code, very quickly I was like, oh, this doesn't feel as good as I thought it would, or it feels, there's this, small bit of syntax that I thought would be fine, and I actually don't like writing it. So I would say it's one of those things that you really have to use, and possibly use yourself to have a strong opinion of. But yeah, it's like so many decisions in programming languages, and even in the past there have been different programming language ideas that I've thought don't make sense, or I would have like looked down my nose at them. But then in time I'm like, okay, I see where that came from. I see even the historical reason why that might have been the case, and even if I don't agree with it, I can be like, that was a trade-off that they made, that was a decision that they made in light of a certain problem. And I think that's the value of experiencing computer science, and probably life in general, is just how you realize that all these decisions are trade-offs. So it's what ultimately it's what makes sense to you, and where you place your value. Yeah, Boolean types are another type that could be useful to denote specifically, but yeah, like you say, maybe similar to Perl, you could have scalar types all be in the same variable, or you might decide to denote it with a different symbol. I would say, from my perspective anyway, from writing this language, there is a bit of a, I guess, tight economy on the symbols that you can use. So if you start using symbols for one thing, you quickly find that you can then, it's then difficult to, there are other places where you would like to also use that symbol and you're like, well, I've run out of common symbols for the keyboards. So unless you start kind of, maybe using emojis or something like that for different operations, like I say, you start running out of symbols very quickly. But again, that's all part of the fun as well. So I'm going to rebase this on the main branch. And let's go ahead and try continuing this. Oh, I wish that didn't happen. So it's rebuilding the, what's it called? The build environment again. That's a bit of a pain. But then I also am not making a change that quickly. I have a few changes to make. Hang on, what's all that about? Oh no, that's just the new changes I've been making because the code doesn't compile yet. So what file is this in again? Source.mod. And that's in where? Validate args. Yeah, and so we're saying for what? For prop in props. Well, I'll probably have to do a locked deref on that. And so what are we going to say here? So there's going to be two types of prop in an expression. The Boolean operators in my language are words. Oh, so similar to Python, is it? So when you have and an R, it's and an R, the literal words, I'm guessing is what you mean. Yeah, so we have prop items can be pairs or they can be a single, but mostly what we're interested in is the name. And I think, like I was saying before, the args, we're probably going to have a frontier, or a queue rather, and that's going to be args. And what are we going to say? So that's probably going to be a clone of args anyway. And we're going to say while. Is there while in Rust? Yeah, it's not like Go. So while queue is not empty, we'll keep doing that. And it doesn't really matter the order that we're going through Q in this case. So we're going to say for prop in props, what are we going to do? We're going to match prop. Call McFly learns from the past but looks to the future. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So it's yeah, I would have thought it would be a temporal programming language in that case, something like TLA plus or something. I feel like would apply quite well there too. So we've got compare the name and value, or if we have single, so when we have single we can collect, but we can't spread, I don't think. No, spread is for when we're constructing an object, and collect is for when we're destructing an object. So let's go ahead and see. So there must be another place where I have Boolean operators and NAND or XOR not, NOR and not. That's interesting. In the case, so is it the way that the Boolean operators will operate on both scalars and arrays, or because the thing about I guess is it XOR is, I believe, especially when applied to Booleans, XOR is just not equals, I believe, and some of those are kind of duplicated in that way. So my language is dynamically typed. It's dynamically typed, but the language that I'll be working on will be, or sorry, it's dynamic, but it's also strongly typed. I wouldn't say it's gradually typed because you can't actually have type annotations on the language, but it'll be strongly typed. So if you give two values to an operator, they have to be of the same type. You can't, there won't be any type coercion or anything like that, any funny business. Maybe I'll just do a grep for is spread, maybe with some context. So I'll say get the 3 lines around it. Oh, have I got the correct? Okay, there we go. So spread in list destructure, yeah, so that's what I want. So that's in bind, and I think I'm in bind, right? Oh no. So I'm just going to step away for a moment, actually, just gonna get myself a glass of water, and I'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. Cool. So, getting stuck back in, we're taking a look at the bind file, I believe, and we're taking a look at is spread. And so we have spread on object destructure. I guess we'll have to create a new variant. So if we're doing it like that, so let's see, what are our values? We have the expression is spread and collect, and so we aren't really interested in collect. We will say if is spread. We're saying that that's an error, and that is an issue because we cannot have a spread on parameter lists, basically. And in this case, we actually don't care about the name of the pair. We care about the value part, which is going to be the rename. And that's going to be put on the queue. And that's basically it for props. And for args, or for the list, again, we're not too concerned about if it's a collection, but we can push the values that we have here. Oh, but we have a similar situation, so actually we do have to go through each list item. Although, no, we can go we need to distinguish between those as well. So they would say that's a property spread. even though they're actually going to have the same descriptions, but it's useful to distinguish between them at a code level for debugging purposes. So let's try that, and we'll just ignore the other issues for the moment. Let's try that. Okay, so you're implementing the redevelop print loop. I mean, I don't think there's a huge leap between the redevelop print loop and actually having an interpreter which will just apply the REPL or the REPL to each line of your source file. So 320, expecting it to be option string for validate args. I guess I need to change that. So that's in mod. So that would be result that. And down here we'll have just OK. Locations not be a parameter because this is no longer going to be recursive. Oh yeah, I think writing, I mean, it took me a really long time, I think, to actually get my footing with writing languages and even just understanding the concepts of them. I mean, I feel it was years even before I even kind of began to understand what tokens were, which is something that, I mean, it's even just kind of a question of phrasing sometimes and mapping theory onto practice, but there is a lot of, I guess, information out there, and a lot of it also assumes a certain amount of just context or prior knowledge that can be difficult to break into sometimes. Yeah, even variables. I mean, that's the thing. Some of these things seem like they would be so simple in theory, but you know, for example, the variables in this language I feel like have come up as an issue a huge number of times for something that's so basic almost and fundamental to the language. it can be very tricky. So, oh, I have to do that, I guess. And 336. I'm missing that. And I'll create that error. I think the line number and column are probably use sizes. Let's try this. So I think just lots of syntax issues at the moment, it seems like. Oh, you don't have to do a let there. I mean, that kind of makes sense. The more people use the Rust language, the rustier they get. I mean, maybe I feel like the less I use Rust, the rustier I get at it. But yeah. To be honest, I kind of dislike the fact that Rust has that name, because then I can't say that I've gotten rustier at it without feeling that I've made a really bad pun. And that frustrates me, but not really. But yeah, no, that's what I mean. Is like it's kind of I guess an easy joke to make, but then when I actually try to express that idea, I feel like it sounds like I'm making a really bad joke. So yeah. Oh, I guess so. More bad jokes. So let's see. Pair, prop item pair, I think. And I probably have to do the same for a list item. So is that defined in AST? Yeah, so that's all right, but prop item, single and pair, I think I need to do like this. And I guess I need to import those. Oh no, they're imported automatically from. Is it a worse joke? Yeah, I think so. I think it is. At least talking about people getting rusty, if you hear people groaning at how bad the joke is, you at least have the plausible deniability aspect that you can say, oh, I wasn't joking. Whereas is rust just a must? Yeah, there's no getting out of that one. Did I like crabs? I'm not sure how safe it is to answer that question. I mean, crabs are interesting. Is it crabs or lobsters? You know, that theory that carcinization. Yeah, the fact that it even has a fancy word. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but I guess it is. But I mean, I think the idea that, you know, yeah, it's like a convergent evolution that so many different species will eventually turn into crabs is kind of interesting. So I guess I find that aspect of crabs interesting. And I do think the name rustaceans to refer to people who write rust quite fun. So arg at the moment is an option. Oh, I see. Can I do, let's see, rust while pop list, something like that. Oh yeah, that's what I mean. So when people are referred to as rustaceans as well, I think it's in reference to that as well. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure if the crab was selected as the mascot because of the phrase rustaceans, or if it was the other way around. Though I assume that it was chosen because of the rustacean. I've never played Rust. I'm not sure I've ever really had. Well, these days I think my computer will be able to play Rust, but I've always had very underpowered PCs, so I've never really been able to keep up with a lot of 3D games in particular, which sounds so sad, but yeah, that is the situation. While let sounds like it would be what I want, while let sum is equal to that. So doesn't exist. Size can't be dereferenced. That sounds strange. I feel like I'm going to have to undo that later on. So what's wrong with 362? Props isn't found in this. Oh, because it's items. And I need to remove the debug from here. Line 314. Should take a pointer to the vector. So let's try that. Okay, I guess I own the value at that point. Maybe I can just clone that so that I own it then. And will that do? Oh, that'll do a deep clone though. Which is not really what I want. So but I also don't want to modify the source array. Not really sure how this would look, a shallow clone in Rust. Yeah, maybe I'll just do a clone for now. At least it'll only occur on each function definition, and in theory won't be, you know, you'd probably be expected to have at most on average like 5 parameters per function, and not many functions. Well, can't really say how many functions you'd have, but it's going to be like, you know, big O5 for most functions. So yeah, I think clone should be fine. So let's see, reinitialization might get skipped. Move occurs because arg has that type which doesn't implement copy. Okay, interesting. So I should probably do a value is moved there. Maybe I do want to just turn those to references. Oh, that's also problematic. Should be value getting pushed there. And similarly, here we should be pushing expression. But I'm not sure if this will actually work. Okay, yeah, go back to needing the dereferences again. 337. That's not needed anymore, is it? Three, four, six. Hi, my product. Welcome back. There comes a time in every programmer's life when they must create a language. I mean, yeah, I think so. I would say that this has been a long time coming for me, and I like to think that I had the discipline to hold off until I actually felt like the language would be useful. But then I'm sure every programmer says that, so we'll see how it turns out in practice. So expected a string but found a reference, so we'll probably want to clone that. And the location, we can probably have that be references to locations as well. Can't return a reference. That is tricky, so I guess I will just have to do a clone. And for each push into the clone, we have to do that. And that is back to being not data deref. But that one does. And I think we're almost at the finish line. Let's see. Location doesn't live long enough. Oh, yeah. So I guess it will just have to be cloned as well. Cool, so that is going to change how that error looks. So if I go to runtime errors and it's do art names, then instead of it being a runtime error as such, it'll be more like an inline error almost. Or rather than having a stack trace, it's going to it's just going to be more like a standalone error. So now instead of line 1 column 9, it's going to say column 1 value there. It's going to say A is already defined at 1, 9. So maybe we'll rephrase that. I could shuffle around the values, but actually so I'm going to call that two bard names 1, two bard names 2. And in fact we won't need to call that anymore to actually get the error. Yeah, so the current language is named Seed. So I think you can see on the GitHub link there'll be a link to it. So the current language is called Seed, i.e. a seed from which other languages will grow. And then the language that I'll be building on top of that will be Ash. Ash, or SH being a typical suffix for either shell programs themselves or scripting languages that target the shell, or are I guess more shell based. So let's see, B is already defined at 112, so maybe we'll rephrase that. B is I guess redefined. Redeclared. position. Oops, where's everything gone? There we go. So we have A is redeclared at 1.9, and then in this file we have, oh sorry, that's 1.9 and this is 1.6. And here we say B is redeclared at 1.12. And that's basically it for that file. And we'll say for the others, all these errors will be returned. So we'll say invalid bind error. Where does that go? Or where does it come from rather? That is in bind. So I have some mismatch on the, oh, some of these have parentheses around them, or braces rather. I do that. Yeah, that seems to do it. And now I can resolve some of these clippy issues. Yeah, I was thinking, oh, that's something different. Oops. And so this is to owned. I'm actually kind of surprised that the error message is formatted the way that it is. So the line and column that we're getting when we encountered the duplicate is for the new name. But why isn't it for the old name? So this is a line and column for the current arg that we're inspecting. Oh, is it because of the order in which we're traversing the vector? That could actually be it. Is it pop left or DQ? Oh yeah, pop front. Vec deck, yeah, vec DQ. Oh, do you have to have a separate type for that? Okay, so I have to use a different data type, but I guess I can create a new one from args. That's in collections. And I guess I can just go from like that. And so I'll be doing push back pop front, I guess. Yeah, and so we actually get it in the order that kind of makes more sense. Oops. Yeah, and that all seems to be working as expected. So what I'll actually do is add that and I don't really think I want to, I guess, merge a branch that's just a single commit for this kind of project anyway. So I'm just going to turn it into a work in progress, merge it as a fast forward branch, and then resume the branch. So essentially we've just merged those changes into the main line, but without actually creating a merge commit, but we'll be doing that now. And this is a new feature, so we'll do that. And are any of those files needing a year bump? No. documentation for this because it's just an error message. And actually, speaking of which, it's just a version, or it's kind of a refactoring, so I will actually just do a patch bump. Cool, so let's take a look at the Scratch file. We've bumped our version number. We're now throwing an error at the point of definition, and potentially the last change for this project. Oh, well, there was the error message, or there's some commented out code. Let's take a look. Oh, and we have to take a look at Lallerpop. That might be the most important one. And we also have nested list equality. What was the issue there? Standard out operations. That actually does sound kind of important as well. So let's try that. Was that giving in an error or something? Oh, it was the error message. So it was happening. So even though it was occurring on a nested error, it's kind of a difficult message to describe. So this is line 2, column 19, so that's just the operator itself, and it's saying can't apply equals to list and list. But really, I guess it's a nested error almost. So this almost deals with generics in a way, which I don't really want to get into the concept of in this language, but I mean, that error message is fairly opaque as it stands, so I don't necessarily want to leave it as is. So where does the error come from? It happens because we're returning none from EQ. So it might make sense. So let's define its standard result. it's returning two strings, then it means that it came from a recursive call, i.e. from a compound type. I'm not loving how this is going to look, but for the sake of actually making the error understandable, and for the sake of finishing this project, we'll go with that. And there's going to be list. So we have render type. And that will be called on LHS and RHS. And we're going to have to do the same for reference equals, I believe. I'll call this new one invalid equals operator types, just to distinguish them, because the LHS in these cases, or the two values in these cases, are going to actually have their types. And so we have LHS, so that this is instead going to be a match. confused here. What am I doing? So we have mod, we have equals. What does equals return? Returns whether it was equal. But is equals not performing the... Oh, it's checking if the two are actually equal, but then if the operator is not equal, it applies that. Okay. So let's do this instead. So we're still going to have the same logic here, except instead of sum, we're going to have OK. And then we're going to have error down here. And in this case, we'll have LHS type and RHS type. And this is going to be equality op types. And we should be able to try that. And I'll just change that to OK for the moment, which should be fine. So let's see how are we going there. I should also probably, in equals, yeah, keep track of the index as well, which is very painful. So it's, yeah, that's a list. Oh. I suppose I'll see the rendering later. Okay, nice. It's heading in the right direction, so it gives us the specifier for the location that failed. Maybe I can actually render the type and the path to the value if it's there. And in fact, the two sides are going to have the same path, so we can just do that. So equals returns a path to the values in LHS and RHS that differ if LHS and and RHS are of different types. And we'll just include a message there. Whew, a lot of typing. Let's see where we are. Now, what is the issue there? Oh, I'm missing a comma is all. Or an inverted comma rather. Oh. And I do actually need to return the types after all that. goes in operations combinations rather than that, so that we can check different combinations. So we'll go nested list equality. Well, no, this is going to be do I have nested list equality? No, not in general, but if I change this to that, then it's correct. And this one goes in runtime errors, I guess. I'm going to call that type mismatch equality, and we'll have a few of these. What's the issue there? Oh, missing exit code. And there's going to be no standard out here, but there's going to be standard error. So that's going to be int and bool, and it's going to be at index 0, and so we'll have a bunch of these. So same thing, except this is going to be at 0, 0. And it's actually going to be at location 7 now. And let's see what it does there. It will be int and list at location 0. And we're going to have poly 4 for a is equal to 1 and a is true, and this is going to be at a. And maybe that should have quotes around it. So that was in, where was that? Eval mod. I'm going to need to do it for equals ref as well, or ref equals rather. And let's just do a combination just for the sake of it. So we'll say 5, and that will be a list containing 1 and a list containing true. And it's the same issue, but it's at location A0. And that's now going to be 12. And so that is, and let's see. Show type mismatch in equality error. Cool, so that's that one done. We'll have to do the same for reference. And then I won't bother with the token to string conversion, but we will take a quick look at the Lollipop version, just because that could be a blocker later if we don't address it, maybe. So let's see. Yeah, first of all, we will go into mod. And basically try and duplicate what we had with equals with ref equals. This looks like it would be easier, but I mean, it is kinda, but it's still a bit painful. Now, I don't love imports like that, so I might alias it, even though I don't have a good alias for it. Yeah, that should be fine. Standard results. And that's actually, we won't need to change this because we don't recurse into it's not structural equality, so we don't need to recursively go into the value. So that's actually fine. We will just add this change as a little refactoring. So let's take a look. Yeah, so actually all of those changes will need to be reverted. So let's do it like that. And that is almost it. So we're just going to take a look at bumping ladder pop again. And see if we can. So now that we're doing it independently from the rest of the Rust update, and maybe having learned something from the Rust update, we can I guess be more successful this time. So let's see. So I guess maybe we should be bumping that as well, potentially. Let's try that. Updating crates. Oh. Is this something new? Is that an error that I generate? I guess not. I mean, if that's all that's needed to get to the latest version of Ladder Pop, then that would be great, because when we were trying before, it seemed like it would take more effort Okay, so it maybe simplified the error message. No, it just changed the order. So I hope it didn't make it non-deterministic, because that would make the test a bit more painful. Okay, so all the symbols are going to the end now. We have identifier, int literal, string literal. I'm not sure. So it used to be alphabetical. Now I'm not sure what that order is. Let me just run it again and see, is it deterministic? Because if it's not, we might actually have to just remove this test entirely. Okay, seems like it could be deterministic. So we've identifier, int literal. Let's get string literal in there. Interpolated string literal. Break continue. False function for. If null, return true while. Closing brace, open bracket, open paren, hyphen or dot dot. So join all those onto one line and see where that takes us. So we've got identifier, int literal, string literal are interpreted, break, continue, false, function, for, if, null, return, true, while, close brace, open bracket, open parentheses. Oh, and I've got an extra comma, of course. Let's try that. So what am I missing? Did I accidentally delete a character? Oh no, I've left out R. Whew. Now, will there be any extra, what are they called? I don't think I bumped the patch version just yet, so I'll need to recompile to get that updated as well. But first we'll see, are there any clippy issues with the newest version? No, that seems okay. So let's compile it again just to update the lock file. Why is it taking so long to compile? Considering I just built it, it should be fairly fast, one would think. spell it? Yeah, all capitals. And done. And that is the seed programming language basically done. Let's just double check anything left in its scratch. We've done ladder pop. Those are little nice to haves that I don't think I'll be doing. String escaping, Lexer. Yeah, that's all stuff that can be done, but I don't think I will be doing, because I guess if there was a number of reasons, I guess more reasons to do it other than just being pedantic, then I would probably get to them. But I am also quite eager to get stuck into Ash, considering this is where the stream has been, I guess, heading towards for a long time. And yeah, pretty excited about that. It's been a long time coming, and we've put in a lot of work into the current project. I mean, there's 300 tests. There is quite a bit of functionality. Let's just jump back into the docs. You know, it's all documented, tested at each level with unit tests, feature tests. So yeah, be interested to have a quick recap of the features as well. So we have comments, of course. We have our 6 major types. So we have null, booleans, integers, strings, and then our compound or reference types of lists and objects. Strings, coincidentally, aren't reference types. So they're essentially singletons in a way. So even if you create 2 strings, you can only do reference. No, you can only do structural equality, which effectively makes them singletons. You can't do, at least in this language, it's not possible, or the functionality to do reference equality on strings isn't exposed. Although we also have, I mean, technically functions are values as well. Maybe I should add that in as documentation as well. And yeah, we've again some of the modern niceties around integer formatting, and we can have escape sequences and strings. We've all the typical operations on integers, and there's precedence rules with parameter or parentheses to override those. We have operator assignment, which took so long. I mean, not necessarily the functionality itself, but kind of, but also it required it, or at least resulted in a big re-dive and re-examination of the, I guess, implementation of integers in, or not integers, but variables in general. We have strings, we have string concatenation, we have string interpolation, we have lists and list concatenation, we have booleans and equality operators, and equality is defined structurally, so you can see if 2 things look the same, i.e. have the same shape. But then we also have reference equality for reference type, so we can see our 2 objects or lists actually the same values in memory. We have comparisons, We have ranges, though quite a simple, I guess, interpretation of the idea of ranges. We have variables. Fantastic. Use our language. We have variables. They are lexically scoped, so at least a little better than vanilla JavaScript, or at least until we had the use of let. We have objects and object shorthands, so some uniform rules around how keys are defined in object literals, but we also have shorthands for when we're destructuring them in particular. And when when a field has the same value as a variable, we can make use of that. We also don't have semicolons, which is nice. They're automatically, I guess, inserted, and the rules are fairly simple, I would say. We have spread operators so that we can, insert lists. We can very easily clone. Well, it's not really a clone, it's more copy. We can quite easily copy lists and objects using the spread operator. And then we have the reverse for collecting values. We have indexing. Oh, I did the syntax highlighting suddenly broke. So we have index assignment based on, for lists and objects, we have list destructuring, and that's where we are able to use underscores to ignore items, and we also have the collect operator for gathering the remaining items from a list, and that can be used for var args as well in object or function parameters. Object properties, kind of mentioned that before. And similarly, object destructuring can be used to take values out of an object and just hoist them into the local environment. And similarly, we can use the collect annotation to gather those. I'm just looking, I think I was a little inconsistent with some of the documentation. Oh no. And similarly, we can use underscores in objects as well. Range indexing, so we can use that to get, substrings and things like that. And finally, we've control flow, and we really don't have a lot about that. In fact, we don't even have really advanced looping mechanisms. We've got if statements, while loops, and for loops, but for loops can only really be used with iterators. We don't allow the for I equals 0 up to n syntax, so that should probably be added in, but it's not there at the moment. Oh, thanks very much, C-Films. Thanks for checking out the stream. Yeah, I mean, that's also an option. I mean, I feel like I should probably have tail optimization for recursion to avoid people getting, running out of memory or having a stack overflow. But that's also a problem for another day as well. So we have functions finally. Well, I'm not sure why I'm saying finally. We've had functions for a while. And functions have closures. They are also values, so they can be stored as variables, passed as parameters, all the usual benefits of functions as first-class citizens. We can have anonymous functions, and parameter lists are treated the same as regular lists so that we can have nice destructuring and var args functionality. We have this with special semantics, so you can play around and you can move functions into different methods, or you can take a function method and just throw it onto another object entirely, and this variable will act I would say fairly intuitively. And we also have type functions. We don't have many type functions actually implemented, but we have the functionality of type functions so that each type has its own namespace of functions dedicated to that type that won't interfere with the, I guess, fields, the user defined fields on those, particularly for objects. And that's really only the only place where this comes into effect. But again, that has been seen to be a bit of a pain point with the likes of JavaScript, where early on you had to use has own property and things like that to determine, okay, is this a property of the language or is this a property that I've defined? And we just sidestep all of that with type functions. And that is basically the language. So yeah, as I mentioned before, thanks to everyone who has been following so far. The code is all here on GitHub. I hope anyone and everyone who has checked out this stream has gotten a little bit from it, has enjoyed it, and I'll still be going. I have a few ideas for, a few updates for the stream in general for the next episode, and so I'm looking forward to that too. But also the development, finally we will be starting on the Ash language. That will be starting in earnest. Not sure why my connection speed has been dropping just there. I've just noticed that a few times at the corner of my eye, but I suppose that's not such a big issue now because I'll be coming to a close on today's stream. But like I said, next time I will be have a bit of a revamp of the layout and maybe trying to have a bit more consistency about the stream in general. But we'll also be starting work, like I say, in earnest on the Ash programming language. It's intended to be an alternative to Bash scripting. So keeping the ergonomics of Bash, Bash is around for a reason. There are a lot of things it does good or does well, but there are a number of idiosyncrasies that can make it a bit intimidating, a bit awkward to work with for people who are used to C-style languages. And so Ash aims to make things a little easier in that regard. So with that in mind, I'll be going to be signing off for today. As I said, no idea what the issue with the with the internet is there, but like I said, thanks to everyone who's been checking out this stream so far. Been a lot of fun and a lot of work, but it has been very enjoyable. And like I say, I hope people have gotten something out of it. And I'll see you again soon. Take care.